of the upcoming Alpine strategy. I welcome you to this session. We had registered 280 participants. I guess some more will come in the minutes to come. Anyway, we should have to start now because time is limited and we have clear restrictions from the organizers to be back in the great tent in the audience at the latest at 12, let's say like that, or 11:45. We will see how to manage it. Well, maybe some of you already attended the session yesterday. It was a rather political, or mainly political session. It was very much different from what we will do today. You have heard yesterday that all the politicians, representatives from states and regions, as well as from the Commission, were highly committed to the Alpine strategy. And today we go a step further. Today it's your floor, of the audience, of the experts, of those who know the situation in the Alpine area. We have today the final closure, let's say, of the consultation phase. To give you a short input on the timeline, with the December Council in Europe in 2013, it has been decided to elaborate a strategy, and the next council, or one of the next councils in late autumn 2015, will endorse the strategy. That means we passed half the way to the strategy, and now it's time to wrap up a little bit what has been happened, and to also analyze and evaluate and to discuss with you what has been elaborated so far, and what was the outcome of the consultation. Well, from July to October, you had the opportunity to participate in the consultation. Beforehand, representatives from regions and states elaborated a consultation document which you could use for food for thoughts, for inputs, and then it was your turn, it was your floor to see, does that match your ideas, does that match your wishes. And now we are here to discuss the results mainly of the consultation, which is also to say where might be some differences from the consultation document to the results of the consultation itself. I think that's something very interesting, and not just for us as those who are elaborating the strategy, but also for you who can give another more input on how to further proceed with the elaboration of the strategy. We have separated this session into two parts, an environmental part and an energy part, according to the different subtopics of the third pillar. And we follow a common scheme how to introduce it, and I would like to introduce my colleagues. I get a lot of support. First of all, I would like to introduce Fridtjof Ehm as the facilitator of this session. He is working in the DG Regio in the unit which is responsible for the Alpine strategy. Next to him is Agnes Kellerman. She is an individual expert commissioned by the COM, and she did the evaluation of the consultation of your inputs, and she is coming from Hungary, and she was also already involved in the elaboration of the three others macro-regional strategies in place. Then from the Interact Secretariats, it's Ivano Magazou. I hope it was the right pronunciation. He will help us for the discussion with you, the members of the audience, afterwards. Then next to me to the right is Giacomo Liciani. He's coming from the European Commission, DG Environment. He is a contact person for the territorial cohesion from the DG Environment point of view, and also for the Alpine Convention there. Next to him is Dari Krajcic from Slovenian Institute for Nature Conservation. His fields of activities are balanced use of natural resources and the awareness of goods and natural assets as a whole. May I say that like that? Then next to him is Anita Konrad. She is Deputy General Director of CEPRA International. I think is well known here. Nevertheless, I say again, it's an international NGO which had the idea of the Alpine Convention in the very origin. She has been living for 15 years in UK. Maybe she got some homesick. She came back to the Alps, to the Alpine region, but you will explain maybe why you come back. And at the very end of this table, it's Reinhard Schiller. He is from the office of the Carinthian government, and he is a regional planner, and he's expert for spatial planning now, and very much involved in knowledge management in rural areas. That's for the moment. I will introduce the other speakers on the energy part later on, and I would give the floor to you, Fridtjof.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. I would also like to say good morning to everybody and would like to welcome you here to this workshop about the environment and energy. I do have the big pleasure to be the facilitator for this workshop, and when I was first asked what if I would like to be the facilitator, I had the question, what shall I do? Might be a challenging and honorable task, but well, I didn't really know what I shall do. I think my task today is to, or well, in other words, to facilitate means to safeguard or to ensure that the objectives of a group are met and to ease a process. And today I would say our objectives here are, our chair just said it, to inform you about the outcome of the public consultation. This will be done by our expert Agnes Killerman directly after me. And then of course as well to generate a debate or to raise the awareness that the whole approach we are doing here, so the whole macro-regional strategy, has a real added value in terms of the environment and also in terms of energy later on. And then, of course, our third objective is, I would say, was also a bit mentioned by our chair already, to generate a debate that leads us to the drafting of the communication and the action plan. So only these minor introductory remarks. I would now only say or make a few remarks about the main challenges and questions concerning this pillar 3 that has to be drafted or has to be worked on in the next coming months. If we are looking at the Alps, we can surely see that one of its main features and characteristics is its tremendous, its outstanding natural and cultural heritage, which is, we don't have very much of these areas in Europe, definitely. And we as human beings, of course, want to make use of it. We want to live in this area, and if we want to use these beauty, this natural heritage, and the soil of the whole area, and the minerals, the abundant, clean resources of water, we of course have to make sure that we protect it and that we use it sustainable. One way to use it is, of course, to produce energy. This will be discussed later, and this also describes very well, I would say, why the two topics of the whole pillar, so the environment and energy, suit that well together. A further point we should discuss is, of course, climate change, because this has considerable consequences for the whole natural heritage, which is mainly, of course, the resources of clean and abundant water, because sometimes major rivers of Europe, like for example the Rhine or the Danube or the Po, as we are here in Italy, rely up to 90% on the resources of these glaciers of the Alps. Anyway, if we are looking at the consultation document, or the core document that was the basis for the public consultation, the main topics of the whole pillar were defined as follows. It was to reinforce the Alpine natural heritage and the cultural resources as well, and to talk about and to elaborate an Alpine risk management, including a risk dialogue. This now was only as regards energy. In summary, I would say that it is very clear that the challenges linked to this pillar, to the environmental pillar, are of outstanding importance, and I do really hope that we can reach these aims I've just described a bit, so mainly to generate a discussion that leads us now to the next steps that we, on the Commission side mainly, then have to lead. Thank you very much. Only these very few words at this moment, and I would now like to pass over to our expert, Anius Killerman. Thanks.
Thank you. I hope that someone back there will put my slides up. In any case, I will be speaking about the results of the public consultation, and as an introduction to the analysis that I have done on the public consultation, I would like to tell you a little bit about how I think the results of the public consultation should be interpreted while we're waiting for the slides. So one thing that's important to note about the public consultation is that the responses that we received were not representative really in any way. So in terms of the nationalities of the people who submitted the responses, etc., the consultation isn't a representative sample of the people who live in the Alps. And the reason that it's important to note this is that when you look at the numerical results of the consultation, you have to, of course, take this fact into consideration. I would say that in terms of how we use the results of the public consultation, it should be more a source of inspiration for what can be done in the Alps rather than, strictly looking at the numbers that I'm going to be presenting. Okay, so now that my slides are up, first slide, please. I mean the second one, obviously, after the cover. Oh, okay, so I will. Yeah, okay, great. So I'm going to be speaking about, first I have one slide on how to identify issues which are relevant to macro-regional cooperation before I introduce you to the public consultation results. And then I will be speaking about the results of the public consultation in terms of the environmental topics which have been identified as important for cooperation. And finally, I will be showing you some actions which have been suggested by the public consultation. So first, how to identify issues which are relevant to macro-regional cooperation. One thing that is very important to remember is that the strategy, which is an Alpine strategy, has to deal with topics and issues which are specific to the Alpine region. So if there are some issues which were identified also in the public consultation, which were specific to a larger region, so maybe the EU as a whole, or some issues which were specific to a smaller region, i.e. some regions within the Alps but not the entire Alpine region, I don't think these are relevant for the macro-regional strategy. So there has to be a focus on issues which are specific to the Alpine region. Issues which are specific to the entire EU should, of course, be addressed at the level of the European Union, and issues which are relevant for the regions should be addressed primarily at the regional level, and we already have the tools for this. So this really should be a strategy which focuses purely on Alpine-specific issues. And within this type of issues, within the type of issues which are relevant to macro-regional cooperation, what we have done for the previous strategies is we have identified two types of topics. One of these is, well, I'm sorry about this, but there seems to be a technical issue. Anyway, I will try to continue to not lose time. So one of these is issues which are of strategic relevance to the macro-regional approach. This means that basically these are issues where one region is affected by what is done in the neighboring regions. So there are spillover effects, which means that For example, in terms of migratory species, if the migratory species are harmed in one part of the macro region, then this will have an impact on the other parts of the macro region. So these are issues which are of strategic relevance to cooperation, because if they're not addressed by the entire macro region as a whole, then the results will not be optimal. The other type of issue, which is also of relevance to macro-regional cooperation, but perhaps of a bit lower relevance, are issues of common concern. These are issues which do not have these spillover effects. So what is done in one part of the macro region will not impact on what is done in the other part of the macro region, but therefore, it's not absolutely necessary to address these issues at the macro-regional level. But if we do address them at the macro-regional level, this has added value. Because, for example, one of the issues which was identified as relevant by many of the stakeholders was the protection of cultural heritage. And many of the different regions in the Alps face similar types of issues related to cultural heritage, for example, cultural landscapes and preservation of biodiversity in agricultural areas. And if there is cooperation, then the regions can learn from each other. So even though there will be no impact, which has macro-regional spillover effects, there's still this very important learning component from sharing knowledge across the region related to these common issues. And then other issues which are not specific to macro-regional cooperation, as I said, should not be addressed in this format, but in a different forum. So first, I would like to show you the slide on which were the most relevant objectives as identified by the public consultation. As you may recall, there were 11 objectives which were listed in the public consultation, and respondent had to choose the 3 most relevant. So this shows that unlocking creative potential in the development of products and services and building on natural and cultural resources was identified as the most important objective, followed by other objectives related to fostering energy efficiency and fostering instruments and procedures to balance the interests of energy production, nature protection, etc. So these were the 3 most important objectives. But what I found when I was analyzing these objectives was that it didn't really. I wasn't quite sure which were the topics that people really wanted to address based on these objectives, because the way that these objectives have been formulated mixes issues, so issues such as energy efficiency, issues such as climate change, with the way that they should be addressed. So I think in one part people were voting for the issue, and another part people were voting for how these should be addressed. And therefore, what I did was I looked at the responses to question 1. Question 1 basically asked respondents to identify topics which are most relevant to being addressed by the strategy. And it was an open-ended question, so people could write whatever they felt like. And many people, so around 2/3 of people who were responding to the questionnaire mentioned environment in some form. So they either mentioned sustainable development in general, or environment in general, or they mentioned specific environmental topics which were relevant to macro-regional cooperation. And I think this is a very strong reflection of the fact that people really think that environment is important in the Alpine region and should be addressed. And then what I did was I coded these responses. So I looked at what people were saying, and I put them into different topics, different categories of topics. And this is what the slide shows. So what people found most important, or what people mentioned most often in terms of topics that should be addressed, were topics related to energy, water resources, natural heritage, cultural heritage, and climate change. So it was very clearly these 5 topics which people found most relevant for being addressed within the macro-regional approach. And there were some other topics which were mentioned which received much less support. Okay, so which of these topics which people identified are actually of relevance to macro-regional cooperation? Well, all of them are relevant, so I think that people had a very good sort of intuitive idea about which issues are relevant for macro-regional cooperation, even though they probably haven't read the impact assessment of the previous macro-regional strategies and had no idea of our approach. but people did have a very good intuitive understanding. So all of these 5 topics, which were identified as very relevant by them, are actually, according to the analysis the Commission has been using, relevant for macro-regional cooperation. And nature and biodiversity is the one which is of strategic relevance. So this is the issue where you will get spillover effects across the region. So biodiversity in one area will impact biodiversity in another area, or fragmentation of habitats will impact the level of biodiversity overall in the Alpine region. For cultural heritage, it's more a common issue. So there are these cultural landscapes with a variety of common elements, and these can be addressed in cooperation, and finding good solutions to how to preserve this cultural heritage can be built on in the entire Alpine region. For water, do I need to speed up? Okay. For water, it's similar. So this is also a common issue where the spillover effects are not so obvious. So there are, of course, spillover effects in the sense that there's this huge water reserve in the Alps, and this impacts on the water flows in various large rivers in the European Union. But in terms of the optimal way to address this, it would be through river basin management plans, and not so much at the level of the Alps. So obviously, because there's a mountain, the rivers flow outward from this mountain, and so it's not in that sense an Alpine issue, but it is a very relevant issue to address in the strategy, because the types of water reserves in the Alps are very specific to the Alps. So the fact that there are these glaciers and glacial lakes, etc., in the Alps, and this is of course in the entire Alps. It's unique to this region, and the approach to water, therefore, can have these spillover effects, not in physical terms, but in terms of learning and understanding of how we should deal with these resources. For energy, there's also and it's also an issue with which is of common concern. Basically, people identified 2 major issues within the energy issue. One of them was related to renewable energy, and the other to energy efficiency, and mostly energy efficiency in buildings. So people were interested in seeing energy efficiency related to traditional building practices. What wasn't identified was these energy networks, so no one really wanted to see an Alpine energy network or transmission network. So therefore, this is an issue more of common concern, where cooperation can lead to learning from each other in terms of how to improve energy efficiency in these traditional types of buildings. Climate change and natural risks was the final topic which was identified. It's also an issue of common concern, where there's a lot that people can do together in terms of monitoring the impacts and learning from each other on how to address climate change in the Alps, which is particularly exposed in terms of the impacts of climate. So the temperature rise has been higher, and it's a very sensitive region in terms of climate change. Okay, so the next question is how to identify which actions are relevant for the action plan. First of all, it's very important to remember that the actions that you will identify as relevant, and which the Commission will identify as relevant for the action plan, should be limited in number. The Commissioner said yesterday, ruling is choosing, and I think that's very important to remember here. Also, in reflecting on the previous macro-regional strategies which have been developed, where, for example, the action plan to the Baltic Sea strategy had to be modified, I think 2 years or 3 years after it was originally drafted, because they found that there were too many actions, the scope was too broad, and they simply couldn't focus on so many actions and have an impact. So it's really important that these actions which are identified are limited in number, to ensure that that there is a critical mass. So there should be a strong focus on a few of the most relevant issues, rather than trying to spread out and please everyone in terms of how these actions will be identified. The actions should be linked to the main issues. So the public consultation has identified 5 issues. I think we can discuss later whether you agree that these 5 issues are the most relevant issues, but they should be linked to these issues and not to a broader set of issues. They should address the drivers of these issues, meaning, for example, that For the cultural landscapes, coming back again to this example, there are these traditional agricultural practices which have an impact on biodiversity in the region. They have a positive impact on biodiversity in the region. And what is happening is that these traditional practices are disappearing and larger farms are taking over from the smaller farms. And this has an impact on the biodiversity in the region. But one of the drivers of this is actually related to demographic change and the economic shift from agriculture to other industries. So if you don't address these drivers, you're not going to see the types of results that you expect. So it's very important when you look at the action plan to think about what's really behind the issues that are driving these environmental problems, identify these and address these to make the strategy more successful. And so what I have done based on the public consultation is I have prepared an initial list of actions based on the public consultation. Of course, these are just examples, so the public consultation came back with many lists of potential actions which could be taken, and I have selected from these. Sorry, it doesn't seem to work every time. Yes. So for nature and biodiversity, these are some examples of the actions. I think that one thing that you can see clearly is that people have a strong wish to address nature and biodiversity within a larger alpine context, either by establishing and implementing common management plans, or even by establishing and implementing transboundary protected areas for the entire Alps or parts of the Alps, which stretch across national boundaries. People are also interested in sharing information, such as sharing a common set of good practices and standards for nature protection, and then also in having or obtaining more information on what is happening in the Alps in terms of environmental or ecological areas. And sharing information, for example, could take the form of having a joint database in terms of spatial database for monitoring habitats and their diversity, or those kinds of actions which increase the information available. Other types of actions which were suggested require physical investment. So, for example, investing in ecological connectivity would require investing in green infrastructure to connect different, currently somewhat fragmented habitats in the Alps. So these are the types of actions people have proposed for nature and biodiversity. It's not moving. Yes. Okay, so for cultural heritage and cultural landscapes, one of the important things one of the interesting things that came out was the links with innovation that people proposed, and the links with the economic sector. And several people had the idea that there should be a promotion of natural remedies within the cosmetic or pharmaceutical industry, and to use these herbs from the cultural landscapes which are there within industries. And this is actually, I think, also an opportunity to connect between the rural and the urban areas, which has been an important theme in this strategy. So connecting the world-class innovation and economic activity which is there in the Alps, but mostly in the urban areas, with the natural assets of the rural areas. Another idea that came out from the public consultation was developing sustainable tourism linked to traditional alpine lifestyles, branding traditional alpine agricultural products. So these are basically activities which aim at the valorization of these cultural landscapes. So these cultural landscapes have been used traditionally for agriculture, and people are seeking new ways to find new types of values within these landscapes which would enable the preservation of these landscapes. People would like to cooperate on the rehabilitation of cultural landscapes, and people have also I think these are the cluster initiatives are very closely related to the first bullet point. So these are the types of activities that people have proposed for cultural heritage. And this is I think the batteries must be low or something. Water resources. people haven't proposed very many actions for water resources, even though it came out as one of the most important priorities, but the number of actions are quite low. And here you can see that cooperating, for example, on cost-benefit analysis for new hydroelectric projects could be moved into the energy sector, so it doesn't necessarily have to be here. And establishing land use guidelines which enable good management of hydrogeological risks could be related to climate change. So one question is, since these are the types of actions people have proposed and all these actions can be moved into other topics, whether there is a point in having a separate topic of water, for example, in the strategy. Of course, the water resources are really important in the Alps, so this would, for example, be an argument for having a separate focus on water so that it doesn't get lost within the other topics. But it's a question to you, maybe you can discuss this later, whether there's a point in looking at this separately. And then finally, actions for climate change. Focus on implementing a joint adaptation strategy at the level of the Alps. This would be very interesting and very ambitious task, seeing the really very big challenges that the Alps are facing and the huge changes that will occur in the Alps as a result of climate change. People are also interested in cooperating on guidelines, for example, guidelines which enable to the good management of hydrogeological risks, or other types of guidelines for local action plans. These would, of course, not be implemented at the actual macro-regional level, but since the types of challenges from climate change are common to the entire macro-region, it would be good to have common guidelines for sectors and for municipalities which don't have the capacity to develop ideas on their own, and to tell them what the most important issues that should be focused on are and how to address these. Then there were actions which were proposed relating to having a common observatory for monitoring impacts of climate change. I think this was something that was mentioned also yesterday in the political segment, and also related to coordinating civil protection and to forecasting and modeling and gaining more knowledge of what the impacts are that should be or that are expected in this region that people need to prepare for. Should I pose the questions now or after the energy segment, or now? Right? Okay. So one of the questions is, do you agree with the 5 topics identified by the respondents, as that these are the most important 5 topics that should be dealt with? These are nature and biodiversity, cultural heritage, climate change, water, and energy. Or do you think that there should be more topics included, or that there should be a more narrow focus on topics in terms of the strategy? Which do you think are the most important actions to be taken in the Alpine region? Do you think that the actions that have been identified by the public consultation that I have shown are relevant? Do you think that do you have some good ideas on what other types of actions are really relevant which haven't been mentioned by me? Maybe they have been mentioned in the public consultation, but of course this was just a summary that I've presented. And to what extent do you think that environment should be a cross-cutting theme across the entire strategy and integrated into the other 2 pillars of the strategy? And finally, what do you think are the most successful initiatives that have been taken so far in the Alpine region, and what are the attributes of these initiatives that make them successful, and how do you think they could be improved? So why do we need why do we need this strategy? How should we improve the governance system in terms of environment in the region? Should I leave the questions up so they can see them? Or, okay. So thank you, and I'll hand over to Giacomo.
Me first.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Agnes, for this contribution. I think it was very interesting, not just for us, but also for you. And it proved that, for me personally, that the consultation was really helpful and made sense, because there are some slight differences to the ideas the states and regions had before. I would like to pick up just 3 points for discussion. First one is there's a kind of statistics according to the mentioning of objectives and actions. Of course, this is a little bit dangerous to talk about statistics. It's not fixed, but anyway, there's a tendency where we can go, where we should go in the strategy. What I consider very interesting is your differentiation between topics of strategic relevance and those which are of common concerns. And coming from that, you said that there's only one topic, the nature and biodiversity, which is really of strategic relevance, whereas the other ones, climate change, cultural heritage, water resources, and renewable energy and efficiency, is just of common concern. Well, and as for the recommendation of the actions, it was a clear recommendation that you say the less the better, in some words. Although we saw now the bullet points, count 23 of them, of possible actions, and it will be further discussion in the steering groups and so on, how to come at the end to the real actions we should place in the action plan. Well, that's for the moment, and I would like to pass the floor to Giacomo Luciani, presenting the input from the European Commission DG Environment side. Please.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. In my presentation, actually, I'm supposed to do it in 7 minutes, so I try to be very focused. I would like, as a first point, let's see if now works a bit better. No, this should be the direction. No, okay. Maybe yeah. I would like to provide some additional inputs to what already Agnes presented concerning the possible priority topics of Pillar 3, and especially focus on giving a bit to you the policy framework within which that regulate a bit these topics at EU level, and with a specific focus on the Alpine Convention. As most of you, I think, know, all the countries, member states and countries involved in the strategies are also contracting parties to the Alpine Convention, and also the European Union is contracting party of the Alpine Convention and of some of the protocols also. After, I have a central question. I will give my answer, but of course if you have a different opinion, I'm very happy to hear your view on this. And finally, a suggestion, but this is really a suggestion, also based, I have to say, on previous experience as a macro-regional strategy for the next step in the development of the action plan. So, for the first part, I would like to focus on the issue of ecosystem and ecosystem services that we have seen already from the consultation as not only one clear topic of strategic relevance within the bigger one of nature and biodiversity, but also one of the main objectives clearly on the basis of which the strategy should focus. And in particular, as I said, I won't spend a lot of time on the topics because Agnes said already a lot on this, but from our perspective, definitely green infrastructure was already mentioned, and the issue of economic benefit of Natura 2000 could be something that within the strategy could be really further developed, could be very useful too for this. Briefly, the policy framework for this kind of topics, of course, you know the 2020 biodiversity strategy, the Birds and Habitats Directive, that are really pillars in the field of nature and biodiversity, and probably you know also we have, now, since not such a long time, a green infrastructure strategy, specifically focused on green infrastructure. And after, I have just a reference for you, as I hope a useful information, this document on economic benefit of Natura 2000 network, with also the link I hope will be useful for you to go a bit more in depth on this issue, specific issue. Alpine Convention. The Alpine Convention, as you know, is an international convention specifically targeted to the Alpine region. So there, again, we have a really solid basis, a very solid legal framework for all the action that we would like to take in this field. And concerning these topics in particular, I would like to mention the Protocol on Conservation, Nature and Countryside, and also related implementation activities within the convention. There is a platform of experts dealing with this topic, the Ecological Network Platform. Second topic I would like a bit to go more in depth is water. Actually, in particular, I would like to focus here on the fact that we think not only the issue, of course, of water quality, but also the issue of water quantity is very important in the Alps. Was already stressed, and now we will, I don't want to go too much far because there is a lot of time. We will speak about later on about renewable energy, hydropower. You know for sure hydropower is a big opportunity, definitely in the Alpine region, but you know there are also linked some challenges. So also to see the issue of water in relation to hydropower for us is very important in this field. Also because renewable energy, including hydropower, we've seen was clearly indicated as an important objective for the strategy on the basis of the consultation, the public consultation. Of course, the big framework for everything related to water is the Water Framework Directive. And concerning the Alpine Convention, I would like to mention the Energy Protocol that specifically deal also the issue of hydropower and the important activities and studies and documents elaborated within the Alpine Convention Water Management Platform. Again, I give this information for input, for we don't have time to go a bit in detail, but I hope can be useful for you. Soil, the other issue, because why soil? Because soil, we think it has effect basically on all the most important issues that are also identified in the consultation. And in particular, I would like to deal with the issue of soil sealing, that, as you know, is a very, very important issue in the Alps, the question of the impermeability of land, of soil, and that has effects on, of course, agricultural land, biodiversity, flooding, water scarcity, and also on climate change, global warming. Just for your information, we have a soil thematic strategy that is an important reference at EU level. And also, again, as a very practical information, could be of your interest, maybe this guidelines on best practice to limit, mitigate, and compensate soil sealing. And I left you also the web link. Alpine Convention has a soil conservation protocol. Also this, again, a very important basis to build on for our future action on this field. This will be very briefly. Agnes mentioned very, very clearly this. Why we do this? Because, of course, these are essential topics where we have to join our effort to coordinate. Individually, the effects on this are very limited. We can go on, because now we have the question with my answer. Of course, the answer is already in the question, but why is important tool for the Alpine strategy, important for the implementation of environmental policy? Again, here, because now I have probably 1 minute, was 2 minutes, 1 minute ago. So I will be very briefly. I would like just to send to you this keyword: coordination, concentration through cooperation. I don't want to launch now a new slogan. We have already the 3 no at the beginning of the macro-regional strategy. Yesterday we heard the 3 yes. Now I don't want to launch the 3 C. But I think this is very important to focus on this. Coordination on the numerous and valuable initiatives that are already in the region, they already play a very important role in the implementation of the environmental policy. And basically in front of me, and on my also side, I have very important actors that already contribute to this. So this is to facilitate the coordination among all of us. And also concentration of available resources. There are a lot of resources, but where is the problem? Sometimes maybe they are not concentrated on the most strategic issues. Now the strategy will help us to identify these key priorities, again, specific in this case related to the implementation of the environmental policy, and concentrate available resources on this. I would like to conclude with my recommendation. No, sorry, just a remark. No, this is important, but I will just mention this. Because just to tell you that the 7th Environmental Framework Program, one of the priority objective of the program, the 7th Environmental Framework Program is the framework of the environmental policy, is exactly to improve the implementation of environmental policy. And that's really an important thing. So it's important, of course, to continue to develop new policy, taking the biggest challenges, but the issue implementation. In this, EUSALP, essential element. Very important funding resource for EUSALP, for the future EUSALP, LIFE program, the Program for Environment and Climate Action also. Just to mention, there will be new so-called integrated project that will give you the possibility to develop projects at really large scale, transnational, so really fit very well for the strategy, combining different funds. For example, also the European Territorial Cooperation Fund. I stop here for this because we don't have time. So my recommendation, I would like really just stress this. Why I said all these things also? Because we have really a very solid basis in terms, as you said, in terms of legal instrument, in terms of strategies, action plan. So my suggestion is, of course, as much as possible, to focus our effort in implementing what already exists and not to develop new strategy action plan if they're not really needed. I just make the example, for example, for climate change. We have already a very important instrument that is the IPAN Convention Climate Change Action Plan. So maybe on this could be a suggestion to focus more on the implementation of this action plan, more than to develop new strategic goals. Why this? To avoid overlaps and to make the best use of the available resources in the region. Thank you very much. So I have also a final thank you. I hope correct one because it's enough.
You did it early, so it's enough. So thank you, Giacomo, for your intervention and your reference to the, let's say, general framework as regards European legislation, and as well your numerous references to the ALPA Convention, and for the offer to get use of the Life Future program 2014 to 2020, which is really good to me. We're expecting a lot from the Commissioner from that side. A short point I would like to raise is the difference of the consultation with your intervention as regards the soil topic. You consider the soil topic as very important, whereas the consultation turned out that the soil topic doesn't really matter, the majority of those participating in the consultation. But that's in the end.
Just sorry on this, just to clarify. Said especially as integrating the issues that were already, absolutely is not our intention to complicate the process, definitely, but it's really as an important element. It was important to focus that should be, in our opinion, to integrate it on the other topics that will be identified.
Well, it's a food for thought for me to have different views, and in the end the action plan is a result of different views, and this will of course also influence the action plan in the end. So now we can go to Dari Krajcic for intervention. I pass the floor to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you also for the invitation. May I have a presentation? Okay. Thank you. Okay. I come from the Institution for Nature Conservation from Slovenia, and we deal with the nature conservancy, natural heritage, and so on. But we see that the topics we were faced today are not separate one from each other, but they are connected. So my title of this presentation is the climate change as the reason for some troubles in the space. Alps are recognized as more vulnerable to climate change than other parts in Europe. That is a very important issue. For example, in Slovenia we have 4 disasters this year. At the end of the winter there was ice on the trees in forest, and it damaged more than half of Slovene forests. We had to cut more than 10 million cubic meters. Then this disaster was followed by the flood never seen before, very beginning in the spring. Then also in the summertime it was followed by another flood, and also about 1 month ago, 3rd flood this year. Beside the huge consequences of these natural disasters, there is also another thing. The frequency of such a disaster is very high. So something is really happened in our vicinity, and we have to be aware about it. For example, that is predict that the temperature will rise more in alpine space than in other parts of in Europe. Ecological zones will move uphill. Plant species will be threatened. Also, we have to be aware of the invasive species. And for the invasive species, the alpine space is really more sensitive than other areas. On the other hand, we find in our country that biodiversity is not recognized as a magnet to attract. That is said by the local government, by the local communities. And we have to, I think, change this approach. Peter, I think you have a stronger hand. Okay. Thank you. That is good international cooperation, isn't it? Well, biodiversity is really important. It is not just the result of the presentation we have heard today, but that is the real important issue, and Slovenia should benefit from its preserved nature. We have the largest portion of Natura 2000 sites among all member states, but we still haven't developed the good things, good parts of this thing. Preserved nature is also the advantage in mitigation and adaptation process on climate changes. Can you press on the button, please? You press too much. Yes, that is very good. Now I come to the final of my presentation. I think we have to sit together around the table, to work together to make a good participation between institutions, between regions, and especially between institutions which are already exist. We don't need new institutions, and we do not need confusion. In that very moment, I am confused a little bit. In this space of Alpine region, I see at least 3 activities nowadays. One is Alpine Convention, another one is Alpine Space as a program, third one is today here EU Alpine Strategy, and there is also the Alpine Strategy on Climate Change or something like this, action plan. And there are a lot of documents, but the cooperation between institutions, between regions is still quite low. I think we have to improve this. So we need a regional management, for example, for Natura 2000 sites or for other natural valuables. We have some species which need migration, for example, large carnivores. We have to preserve large carnivores in Slovenia. We have to make ways to another countries, but when they come to the border, they cannot go anywhere. When they come to the Austrian border, they are not allowed to go to the other side of the border. So that is a quite big problem. That is just one issue. Other issues connecting to the biodiversity, all of these issues are international. And because the Alpine region is such a region which connects all those nations, I think we have to improve this cooperation. Maybe this strategy is a good tool for such an activities, but I am afraid that it will be just another document. And Peter, will you maybe help all of us to transpose these documents into action? And I think we have to do it. And we don't have to think about economy every time. Pope was in the EU Parliament recently, and what did he say? Giacomo, maybe, do you know that?
It's meant several important things.
Yes, but what was quite interesting for me. Do not make EU on the base of economy, but on the base of connectivity, social event, and so on. I think that is also the opportunity to make this approach through this strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dari, for your intervention. Yes. For that time we have. Thank you also for pleading for this high importance of nature, not just economy. It's also a matter of nature. And as regards the making the best of the strategy, it's up to us, of course, to us and to the audience to make the best out of it and to propose the concrete actions. And thank you again for reminding us on the strong impact on climate change. This is also a result of the consultation that this topic has a little bit raised up compared to the consultation document. So thank you for that. And now I pass the floor to Anita Konrad from CIPRA. Please.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'd actually like to bring us back to the point of the economy, if I may. In preparation for today, I've looked at the questions that Agnes has given us quite helpfully, and I've come up with 3 responses to those. I'll give you my 3 responses, and then I'll be interested to hear in the general discussion what your views are on it. So the questions that I have got answers for, or have at least got my answers for, are the chosen topics the right ones, and should the environment be a cross-cutting theme? The second one, what are the most important actions? And the third one, what are the attributes of a successful alpine macro-regional project in the Alps? Now, for the 3 points, I think the environment is an important topic in its own right, and I think it needs to remain that. Having said that, I would challenge all of you to name a single example where environmental challenges and environmental problems are not caused by something else. Nature has the capacity to renew itself, but it's not intrinsic to its nature to degrade or destroy itself. So that also suggests that we cannot look at the environment in isolation. So we need to factor in economic, social, and other considerations. So my plea here is, let's not go for a compartmentalized approach, although I recognize that in order to get things done on the ground, we have to be pragmatic and choose our topics quite clearly. In a way, I think the structure of this workshop, and you will forgive me for saying that, reflects that dilemma we have, because it is probably fair to say that the question of energy generation, in particular renewable energy generation, is one of the most challenging topics when it comes to balancing the need for energy with the protection of the environment. And the fact that we're discussing those 2 topics in separate sessions now, I think reflects that challenge quite well. I would also say we need to redefine what we mean by the environment, and especially when it comes to things like cost-benefit analysis. Some of these things were suggested in the consultation. We have at the moment, I think, a somewhat schizophrenic situation in that it's not clear who defines at what point an environmental feature becomes an economic asset. So who says when an alpine river becomes an economic asset that is used for the generation of hydropower? And I think we need to redress that balance. And if we go back to the basics of economics, and I will not bore you with those, then I would say very briefly that an asset has a clearly defined value. But, and that's important, and that's where we often fall apart in our discussion, an asset does not necessarily have a price, which means it is not necessarily for sale. And I think that is something that we need to keep bringing back to the discussion, because we are effectively talking about common goods. What we then have is that if we apply economic terms and concepts inconsistently, that a lot of environmental degradation happens under the banner of economic development. And just to be quite clear, this is not the point about talking against economic development. I'm not against capitalism, but again, I'm against capitalism and economic development that doesn't respect finite resources. Which leads me on to a second point. If you want to redefine how we think about the environment and how we talk about the environment, I would suggest, and that's picking up one of Giacomo's points, we talk about it and think about it in terms of infrastructure. And more importantly, we talk about it in terms of an infrastructure that is equal to an energy infrastructure, a road infrastructure, a social infrastructure. At the moment, and I think that that's one of the dangers in the EUSALP documents as they stand, we almost assume that environment is something that happens or that we find when we go and climb a mountain over the weekend. And that is absolutely not the case. We also have that very strong tension between the urbanized areas within the Alps and the rural or natural areas. And I think for EUSALP, environment is also something that needs to be considered in the urbanized areas. We don't need a reservate where biodiversity happens. This needs to permeate everything we do, everything we plan, and everything we invest in. With the distinction that urban green infrastructure, urban environments have different functions and different roles to play. But it's certainly not the case that the wilder parts of the Alps, so the more natural parts as we define them, can only act as resources for the urbanized areas. What it does when we think about infrastructure is that it also opens up synergies, and it gives us a seat at the table to plan together with other professionals, but also to manage conflicts. And I think that is a very important part, and I think Dagi has mentioned that it's also about the dialogue. But for that, we also need to get the concepts right. We need to know we're talking about the same things. I'll give you, because I didn't want to single out a single alpine country, I'll give you an American example. Portland has managed to save about $8 billion by applying an urban, rural, catchment-based, watershed-based approach to its flood risk development approach, to its water quality improvement approach. There are good examples out there, and I think the Alps really have the potential to become showcases for such approaches, if we get it right and if we don't retreat back into our respective areas. With infrastructure, there is also something that's called the hierarchy of priorities. And as an organization, TIPA is very clear. We talk about investing in existing infrastructure rather than building lots of new infrastructure, making it more efficient, but also more importantly, and that's where it gets quite personal, we all need to change our behaviors as individuals, as well as collectively, as organizations, as governments. We need to consume less, and we need to consume differently. This is not about saying that the fun will stop in 10 years' time. This is to say, think about how we go about our lives and how we go about business. And just as an aside, environmental efficiency is very, very good and is a very powerful locational factor for economic development. I'm a planner, so I'm also a regional planner and an urban planner. And I would say, for planners, it's always interesting to have a bit of a plan and a bit of a map. And so I would offer you one concept, which is a master plan for the Alps, which is something we need. That sets out where functions sit best and most most efficiently, but also where they do the least harm. Now, politically, I'm fully aware that this is my vision. I'm aware that politically that's a very difficult concept, because such a plan will also say that certain regions cannot have another transport link or cannot have another hydropower installation. But I think these are choices we need to make, and in a way I think we're all making those choices as planners in our daily work life, and this is about a hierarchy of priorities. Now, the final point, and I'm sure I'm approaching the end of my time, is that was the question about projects and what would a EUSALP project look like. Can I say, without wanting to be too controversial, I would be very disappointed if we had EUSALP projects. Because what a strategy is supposed to do is to guide our thinking and to act as a catalyst for doing things differently, to think about what we have. The Alpine Convention has been mentioned in many places, to build on what's there. As an aside, again, the Alpine Convention, unlike EUSALP, is legally binding, so we need to respect what's in the protocols, and we need to build on those. But really, what we want for EUSALP, surely, is that it brings us together and gives us a common rationale to do things differently and to mainstream those activities. EUSALP needs to generate a few showcases and projects that demonstrate how doing things differently can look like and can feel like, strategically, but also very tangibly on the ground. But ultimately, it's about embedding its principles and its priorities in how we go about our daily business. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, for your intervention and your general reflections as regards, for instance, the question, when becomes an environmental feature an asset? Then I noted the green infrastructure should be equally treated to other infrastructure to change behavior, and that we should not seek for EUSALP project, but for general projects in the frame of the EUSALP. And of course, your ambition to get a master plan for the Alps. I know the planners would like to have those plans, even if in reality it's sometimes a little bit more difficult, but we try to do our best. So thank you. Now I pass the floor to Reinhard Schindler.
Good morning, everybody. My intervention will be on under this main target of climate change, but also climate protection. Therefore, I would like to show you some needs for cooperation, some fields of cooperation, but I also will come down to a project level to give you a feeling on what could happen, what could be possible. Giacomo already mentioned that you will see that there's no need to invent a lot of things. We have a lot of projects, a lot of actions running within the areas, and therefore I will start with 3 fields, mainly which are also important part of this pillar 3. So same problem like the other hand. Yeah. Question is where to put it. Okay. So I start concerning these needs of cooperation. I will focus on the natural resources, and the question is, what's the framework for a greater agreement and cooperation within the Alpine regions? And as I see it, we know that to preserve natural areas is necessary to have important areas for future generations, for fauna, flora, and human beings. And on the other hand, there are EU-wide, national, regional framework like the Birds and Habitats Guidelines, the Natura 2000, as instruments for a EU-wide nature and biodiversity policy. And The third point is we have in each of the regions we have different kinds of protection areas. We have the classical natural protection areas, but we also have national parks. We have nature parks as a link between tourism and forestry agriculture. So we know that for all these basic frameworks there are regional regulations and also regional definitions of protecting levels, and the assets to be protected are different in each country. Okay, it's pretty. Yeah, ich hab's da oben. Okay, so what we need is, as already was mentioned, to have a platform for harmonizing and collecting, but also assessing data. We need common methods for monitoring and management of protected areas, but we need also an exchange of methods for public participation, for awareness within this region concerning these natural resources. And we also have a different understanding of that. As an example, because of the colleague of Slovenia, I'm coming from the south of Austria in Carinthia, and we have also a kind of natural protection areas, and on the Slovenian side there are a lot more. And we are wondering how it is. It's the same landscape, so we have different methods and different regulations, as I suppose. The second point under natural resources is that we need also interregional management plans for rare species. So, okay. Therefore, there's another project also still running. It is planned under the Southeast Transnational program to try to find the right routings for wolves and so on. What's that? Oh, it's the wolf. And finally, I also want to focus on a new instrument. So this calling interregional this landscape planning. We have to join this on the interregional level as an instrument to protect, but also develop specific typical natural, but also cultural heritage. Like this. Okay. Finally, there is a need for know-how exchange and also to define common projects on kind of use natural resources. And I think that there we can have the aim to develop products under the aims of preservation together, like herbs, honey, wood, cosmetic, and so on. And this is exactly these ecosystem services as I understand, which should be defined much more under Pillar 1. And this is also the link then to Pillar 1. So coming to yes, next point, energy efficiency. I don't see any sustainable energy strategy for energy use and production all over the regions. And I think we have to combine all existing, if there are some. One of these could be, I will show you in a few words this example in Carinthia. We have this energy master plan, and there we have the main objectives to be carbon-free or complete change to renewable energy in the sector electricity and heat till the year of 2025, and in mobility sector till 2035. And the measures there will be in the production, but also in the energy consulting. And finally, changing legal framework and, of course, also guidelines in building sector for saving energy. And last but not least, a new funding system to be successful in this has to be established. We have also to exchange these instruments and procedures to balance the interest of energy production, nature protection, and other land uses. This is also a task between our regions. The second, under this need of cooperation, energy efficiency, could be a check of spatial compatibility. And this is an instrument also useful to, in Carinthia we use that, there's an option on that in the regional regulations, and it can be used in the pre-phase of project planning, where it is included to find alternative locations and balancing and will be balance economic and risk effects. For example, if you, as you see the concerning the routing for big infrastructures like power lines, it can be an instrument to avoid conflicts in advance. Coming to the last point of needs for cooperation, this preventing natural hazards. There are a lot of plans, monitoring systems, constructions within the Alpine region which are implemented, and of course there's a lot of experience. But this exchange of experience, exchange of impact of the measures and the exchange of effective instruments would be necessary. One instrument, one kind of project could be to have an interregional special development plans. Therefore, development and protection areas will be provided with specific development priorities. So that's an instrument where living industrial tourism zones, but also zones with potential for raw materials will be defined, and as well as potential hazard areas, so-called brown zones, or blue zones, flooding areas, and finally also green zones, areas for recreation, natural protection, or only free areas for future generations. And this is very similar to the France model of bleu et vert zone. A second point can be interregional map of geological hazards. Most of Austrian regions are working together with research institutes to establish such maps as a basic tool for planning, safeguarding measures, and to avoid risky developments. In these plans we try to list all relevant disasters found in the areas and disaster events, and the aim is to have then an Alpine hazard map, so-called also these kind of brown zones. A third example can be interregional elements of climate. We, in Austria, also some example existing, so the 4 western regions of Austria has started a project to evaluate the risk of climate change, as it was mentioned also before, and to develop fitting adaptation strategies. And such an interregional access could be one part of cooperation with other regions, and I hope it will be in the list of actions in the future. My last slide concerns some ideas for funding sources for cooperation. They were already mentioned, but as I see, of course, this Alpine Space Program, and there are 2 axes, so one for the financing and funding of measures which focus on the content, and the other one on the governance, because there is also the aim in there to have well-governed Alpine space. I also see a potential to use these inter-cross-border programs, so if there is a linkage between some cross-border programs. We shouldn't forget this real development program. They are under priorities 4, 5, 6, and finally in the sector of LEADER program we have some options for transnational cooperation and therefore for funding. It was mentioned already from the channel this LIFE program, DG Environment and Horizon programs. These should be in focus too. And last but not least, perhaps we succeed also to use different national funds from each member of this Alpine region. For example, in Austria there is a climate fund and other one which can be perhaps combined. Thanks a lot. Finally, I want to mention that Austria already tried to elaborate a kind of action called this turning Alpine natural and cultural heritage to an asset of a high quality living area, and this will be sent also to the Commission as an example, and I hope it can be in discussion. It will be in discussion in the next time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Reinhard, for your intervention. Again, you could see here the planning attitude of a planner, which is considered positive. You talked about management plans, energy master plan, geological mapping, and what you also mentioned, what is really important, is to refer to existing funding programs, not only European ones, but also to regional and national ones. This is the main idea, of course, also of the strategy, to align those funding opportunities. So, what are you doing now, Fridtjof?
Yes, thanks very much. I think we've had a already very interesting debate this morning, or presentations, and now we want to integrate all of you. I would like to pass the floor now to Ivano Magatsu, and this is now more or less, he will start with a very short presentation, and this is then more or less the last chance for all of you before the Commission doors will be closed to present your ideas that can be integrated in the action plan, because as you know, as it already has been mentioned several times, we had a very successful public consultation, and now Ivano will make a very short presentation, and then we all ask and hope for your participation.
So thanks, Fridtjof. Hello to everyone. It's now time, to get your inputs and to share all of us what are our views and our opinions on what the future strategy may address for facing the problem that up to now we saw here. So just we have a few food for thoughts for you. Let's hope the presentation will. All right. Let's wait. So maybe I can just start with a quick reminder to all of you. What we would like to get from this quick debate is your main inputs in order to help also the Commission to better design the strategic backbones of the strategy that should be, completed before next year, and clarify maybe if you have some doubts or you want something to be clarified by our speakers. And to start among you, the stakeholders of the European Union strategy for Alpine region, what you want to be at. Can you hear me? Yes. And we want you to be involved in this debate. So just be proactive, don't hide. Please share your concerns, your opinions, your view. Our speakers, the experts, the Commission are here for you, for listening to you, what may be your needs and idea on this. So if there's no presentation, we will do in a different way. So we know up to now that we have our objectives, almost set up. What I would like to make you to think, to what could be your input to this debate, to this discussion, is one finding we found, in fact, in the Alpine Convention. In fact, the Alpine Convention is stating that the Alpine area is covered by, let's say, a huge percentage of protected areas. Maybe someone among the audience will know the percentage, but this may help you to think if something is happening. If maybe there's something more to be done to protect environment in this strategy. Up to now, the Alpine Convention stated that 23% of the Alpine area is covered by protected areas. So just think to this. Maybe this is one idea for you to think and to share some concerns about the protection of environment. And now, I don't know if you get exactly I would like to remind you questions that our experts presented us, and these are in fact, if you as audience agree on the topics that the public consultation expressed, and if these are exclusive or not to this area, and what could be the most important actions to be done among the strategy, and if there are cross-cutting themes that could be also identified. So if someone has some question, please just share with us, and we will try to provide you some input or take it on board for the design of the future strategy. Question, please.
Paolo Angelini, Ministero Ambiente, attuale Presidente del Comitato Permanente della Convenzione delle Alpi. Ma prendo la parola per correggere un'informazione. Il 23% sì è protetto, ma delle aree utilizzabili, altrimenti le aree protette naturalmente, come le vette di alcuni monti, sono protette per loro natura. Basti pensare che il Monte Bianco non è diventata un'area protetta neanche sopra i 3.000 metri, che pure era stata fatta come proposta. Sopra i 3.000 metri facciamo un'area protetta. Ecco, non è un'area protetta, si protegge da sé per qualche modo dagli interventi umani. Questo mi premeva sottolinearlo, ma visto che ho la parola e non ho visto per il momento una grande richiesta di interventi, volevo fare alcune precisazioni rispetto agli interventi che ho sentito dagli illustri colleghi poco fa, e in particolare mi riferisco alla parte iniziale. Sono stati fatti delle elaborazioni dei risultati dei questionari, ma a nostro avviso è molto importante poter disporre dei questionari, delle risposte di base, perché poi le elaborazioni, sappiamo, possono essere molteplici e da molteplici punti di vista, e la conoscenza si nutre degli elementi di base oltre che delle elaborazioni. Quindi sarebbe importante poter disporre il prima possibile online di questi risultati, di queste consultazioni. È importante sapere peraltro distinguere in cluster di chi ha risposto, perché è importante per poter avere una visione del risultato più efficace. Un conto è che io ho il punto di vista di un operatore turistico, altra cosa è che ho un punto di vista e quindi le risposte sono, anziché di un operatore turistico, di un operatore forestale, che ha per sua natura uno scopo e un business diverso, o un amministratore, un pianificatore. Quindi la clusterizzazione delle risposte diventa molto importante. Ho sentito alcune affermazioni sulla base del valore del capitale naturale. Ecco, anche lì bisogna distinguere tra un bene pubblico e un bene privato, ma non è detto che un bene pubblico non possa essere privato. Il bene pubblico in quanto d'uso pubblico oppure di valenza pubblica, ma può anche essere di proprietà privata, ma non per questo è meno importante da un punto di vista pubblico, di godimento da parte del pubblico, e quindi bisogna distinguere sulla proprietà. Io vengo dalla scuola di un ministro, il ministro Ruffolo, europarlamentare, che diceva sempre che fino a quando gli economisti non si occuperanno di ambiente non si potrà veramente parlare e avere uno sviluppo sostenibile, perché l'economia è qualcosa di trasversale, così come lo è l'ambiente, è qualcosa, un interesse trasversale. Tutti noi lavoriamo per uno sviluppo economico e lavoriamo al tempo stesso per una conservazione della natura, e questa è la base dello sviluppo sostenibile. Quindi dobbiamo necessariamente misurarci con questo contesto trasversale di economia e di natura, sempre. Non potremo mai farne a meno, perché ne dipende la nostra stessa sopravvivenza. Ho sentito anche che forse c'è qualche elemento di confusione, perché esisteva la Convenzione delle Alpi, poi sono arrivati programmi finanziari come Spazio Alpino, ora EUSALP. Ogni volta che si fa qualcosa di strutturalmente nuovo è perché prima qualcosa non ha funzionato bene. Cos'è che non ha funzionato bene nella Convenzione delle Alpi? Due cose fondamentali: il coinvolgimento del territorio non è mai stato adeguato. Noi abbiamo spinto molto nell'ultima presidenza italiana per il coinvolgimento del territorio, delle regioni, dei comuni, e un'altra cosa che ha funzionato poco è il coinvolgimento dell'Unione Europea. L'Unione Europea è parte firmataria della Convenzione delle Alpi, ma quella sedia per lo più è rimasta vuota. E questo perché? Perché lo sviluppo dell'area alpina poi si è visto dipende da due direzioni diverse. La DG Ambiente, che si occupa di ambiente, e la DG Regio, che si occupa di sviluppo regionale. E ritorniamo ai due settori concorrenti tra loro ma trasversali: economia, sviluppo e ambiente. Allora si è fatto prima dei programmi finanziari gestiti a vario livello ma ispirati dalla Commissione Europea e in particolare dalla DG Regio, e poi si è visto che anche in questo caso le due cose, l'ambiente e lo sviluppo, non coincidevano e quindi era necessario dare una strategia allo sviluppo di un territorio così importante come quello delle Alpi, e fare questo ha richiesto in qualche modo un coinvolgimento più ampio. Ecco EUSALP da dove è nata. Laddove qualcosa non ha funzionato in passato bisogna ritornare su quelle cose e agire con una più ampia consultazione, con nuovi strumenti se possibile, e quindi l'EUSALP deve essere vista in questo modo, in una logica di sussidiarietà. Nell'ambito di EUSALP entrano tutti gli attori perché possano insieme individuare un nuovo modo di procedere, una nuova governance. Ecco, EUSALP, l'importanza di EUSALP sta proprio lì. Quindi devono esserci dentro le regioni, devono esserci il territorio, che prima era scarsamente considerato, deve rientrare l'Unione Europea, devono rientrare gli Stati in qualche modo già associati come la Convenzione delle Alpi. Questo è il vantaggio, ma anche qui c'è un grosso rischio su cui io richiamo l'attenzione, che la Commissione Europea, ovvero l'Unione Europea, così come ha operato in Convenzione delle Alpi, se ne sottragga a questo tipo di coinvolgimento. In futuro, io ho sentito anche da autorevolissimi rappresentanti della Commissione Europea che questo è uno strumento che gli Stati devono portare avanti, EUSALP, sì, ma insieme all'Unione Europea e a chi per essa, ovvero la Commissione. In futuro non possiamo immaginare che anche EUSALP non funzioni con un pieno coinvolgimento della Commissione Europea. Grazie.
Thanks, Mr. Angelini. Please, we have another question here, please.
Fritz Binner-Kriegelstein, Chefredakteur vom Magazin Energiebau aus Wien und zugleich Energieberater Renewable Energies Consulting. Wenn ich Schach spiele und einen Zug mache, dann muss ich mehrere Züge vorausdenken, sonst geht die Sache nicht gut. Eine indirekte Strategie kann Erfolg zeigen, wenn eine direkte Strategie nicht Erfolg zeigt. Oh, yeah, okay. I was asked to speak English. I will do my best. Okay, my name is Fritz Binder-Kriegelstein. I'm a consultant of energy, renewable energies. I'm a chief editor of a magazine called Energy and Construction from Vienna, Austria. When I'm playing chess, sometimes not the direct way, the indirect way is the best one to accomplish an objective. In that way, regional strategy for the regions here of the Alpine regions may be another way to accomplish better in an indirect way. Not to think about what could be in the regions, but to see what is the real big problem. So when you go to the emissions of CO2 in the world, 90 industry corporations, 90, only 90, doing 61 of the emissions in the world. Out of these 90, 83 are energy corporations. So fossil fuel, gas, coal, and so on, including nuclear power, because nuclear power is coming from power station mostly already paid off by taxes 20, 30, 40 years ago, and now the price is low, but the real price is much higher when you include all the costs of it. So I would intentively recommend and ask if you are all aware of that. That's my question. Shouldn't we better, especially for that community here, concentrate on changing the energy system to get up added regional value, and the most actual practice and example is Mr. Eggenberger, Minister of Environment in Bavaria, is sitting here. His engagement is really outstanding, and on the other way, his government set a new law into force that wind power is not able in more than 90% of the area from now on. And the development of wind power in Bavaria not even began already. So this is a very actual example how the real world works, and how, and I'm pointing especially on added value for the regions of the Alpine regions, could be achieved by decentralized energy production and getting many jobs erected in this area. Thank you.
Just a last quick question, please.
Allora, siccome la traduzione io parlerò in lingua italiana, sono Flavio Ruffini, direttore dell'Agenzia per l'Ambiente della provincia autonoma di Bolzano. Complimenti per le presentazioni, però ho avuto un'esperienza, diciamo, un po' di sliding doors nella mia mente, perché mi sembrava di essere rigettato quasi 20 anni indietro, quando è stata firmata la Convenzione di EUSALP. Io chiederei un approccio più innovativo, cioè la figura che è stato caratterizzato qua sono l'arco alpino oltre i 1500 metri, bellissime foto di paesaggio rurale, bellissime foto di montagna, habitat per lupi, habitat per orsi, giustamente è anche esatto, ma è ben oltre. Noi abbiamo anche tanta gente che ci vive, e da lì arrivano i veri conflitti ambientali, e da lì che forse in un nuovo approccio intersettoriale dobbiamo cercare di risolverli. Non abbiamo bisogno di una seconda convenzione degli Alpi. Noi dobbiamo fare un passo in avanti. Che cos'è allora l'approccio innovativo? Allora sicuramente una più forte collaborazione tra pianura e montagna. Io chiedo che questo sia riflettuto anche in questa EUSALP, perché io credo che sia fondamentale. Io credo anche che la realtà, soprattutto della protezione, non è un problema di alta montagna, ma è un problema di vallata, di pianura. È lì che dobbiamo creare i corridoi, è lì che abbiamo le difficoltà, ma sicuramente non nella collaborazione tra, faccio l'esempio, Parco Nazionale dello Stelvio e il Parco Nazionale della Svizzera, che sono abbastanza elevati. Lì abbiamo problemi naturalmente di collaborazione a livello amministrativo, ma meno tecnico. Ho fatto anche alcuni progetti, soprattutto con la CIPA, che condivido molto l'intervento che è stato fatto, Iconnect per esempio. Non è un problema di alta montagna come abbiamo visto lì, ma un problema di fondovalle. La stessa cosa vale anche per i grandi corridoi di rete elettrica. Non è un problema di alta montagna fare una rete lì, ma provate a passare in vallata a fare un'altra linea di alta tensione. Questi sono i problemi. Poi credo che dobbiamo essere, questo io chiedo anche alla Commissione europea, quando interpretiamo un questionario, questo questionario va interpretato sempre dal prima all'ultima domanda. Se davanti chi mi risponde, io ho letto le risposte della consultazione a livello italiano. Se nella prima risposta mi viene detto dobbiamo essere più intersettoriali per far combaciare le diverse politiche, beh, allora lo dobbiamo portare anche nell'interpretazione dei possibili piani d'azione, delle possibili azioni. Io credo di fare un mera sviluppo dell'arco alpino incentrato solo sull'agricoltura di montagna, sullo sfruttamento delle risorse biologiche per l'energia sia un po' poco.
Thanks. So just a quick last question here. Okay.
Hello, Katharina Kling from Alliance in the Alps. We are a net of community in the Alpine region, and I am representing our almost 300 municipalities today. And for that, I would like to borrow the words of our French member of the board. He said he's a mayor of a municipality in the French Alps, and he's more than willing to preserve the economy in his region, and he is aware of the responsibility that he has with his location in the Alpine region, but he's also responsible to his inhabitants in... It doesn't work very well. He's also responsible to the people living in his municipality and that they can live in their region. And so I can't underline enough what Anita and Mr. Kracic said, that we cannot consider the environment isolated, but we have to bring it together with economical factors and social factors, and I think we also have to combine the role of nature and biodiversity with the quality of life in our Alpine region, and for that we already worked on a project since the beginning of 2014. The project is called Dynab Nature, and I just want to try to give a concrete example what we could do in the action plan. We have 4 cooperation projects between municipalities in the Alpine region. We are working on the marketing of regional products and ecological landscaping. We are working on biodiversity in urban areas in the Alpine space. We are working on visitor management, and I think this could be approaches and concrete action for this, which could also be important to implement this strategy, which could be examples for concrete projects. Thank you.
Just the last question, please, be short.
Sarò brevissimo anche perché non volevo fare un intervento. Uno dei problemi che ho riscontrato nella vostra illustrazione è che da parte dei rapporteur forse non si è tenuto conto del lavoro fatto soprattutto nell'ultimo biennio al tavolo della Convenzione delle Alpi coordinato dal Ministero dell'Ambiente italiano, dove l'integrazione è stata portata avanti. L'esempio che faccio per esempio è su Planalp, che è un gruppo di lavoro che ha tenuto conto dei rischi naturali. Mi sembra che quello che è stato illustrato qui sia leggermente, come diceva anche il dottor Ruffini, un po' datato rispetto all'avanzamento del lavoro. Ma volevo capire il rapporto che c'è tra specificità dei problemi alpini, così come li avete illustrati, e problemi più generali. Faccio un esempio pratico. Da noi in Italia è stato lanciato da pochissimo, da Renzo Piano, il problema delle periferie, tra cui uno dei temi principali è quello del recupero energetico dell'edilizia costruita negli anni 60-70, che dal punto di vista proprio delle esigenze energetiche è disastroso. Allora, il rapporto che c'è tra costi-benefici a livello globale, per esempio, intervento edilizio alpino, che ovviamente dovrebbe seguire i canoni più attuali che la tecnologia offre, e un intervento invece nelle periferie urbane contigue nell'area della strategia, voglio dire, i costi-benefici sono evidenti. Forse nelle periferie delle grandi città l'impatto di CO2 che si andrebbe a diminuire con questi interventi sarebbe estremamente più elevato che quello del recupero dei singoli edifici in montagna. Allora vorrei capire la chiave di lettura che è stata usata per sintetizzare le richieste che tutti i vari stakeholder, che mi rendo conto è estremamente difficile non clusterizzandoli come proponeva anche il dottor Angelini, poi tradurli in valori da attribuire alle politiche.
I give the floor to the chair and to the...
Okay, thank you very much for these interventions, which more or less group among the issue of governance. It's coming from the Alpine Convention, saying that we need to respect it, of course, as an instrument existing for a long period, more than 25 years. The same came from the local authority representatives, saying that the local authorities will play or should play a main role in the strategy, and also from your intervention to have this new ways, new approaches, also involving not just mountain areas but also urban areas, which means urban areas within the Alps but also urban areas in the surrounding of the Alps. So this is very much a matter of governance, and at the end we came, or in different points we came to the issue of energy, which leads us to the second part of this session. I would like to close with the environmental part with those words, if you agree, unless the experts have see the need for an intervention. No, it is not the case. Then I would suggest that we now turn to the energy part. I thank the experts for the environmental part, and I would like to ask the three experts for the energy topic to take a seat here in front of you. So we move, as announced, to the second part. Even though the one expert is missing, but I saw him already in this room, but I'm sure he will come. Nevertheless, I will introduce him already now. But I start with Paolo Angelini, who is the acting president of the Permanent Committee of the Alpine Convention. We had the pleasure the last 2 years to get chaired by you in the Permanent Committee. And 2 weeks ago we had this Alpine Conference, the final conference under the Italian presidency, and you are presenting here the Alpine Convention. Next to him, this is Christian Schaffer. He is from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, and there he is executive director of the Energy Science Center, which is a center working interdisciplinary in the field of environmental friendly energy systems, in some words. and Patrick Biard. By accident, he comes. It's Patrick Biard, coming from France, from the Rhône-Alpes Energy Environmental Agency, which is active in the field of energy efficiency, renewable energies, and which is also frequently a member of Interact Alpine Space Project dealing with those issues. That's for the moment from my side. I hand over to Fritjof.
Yes, thanks very much. I will also be very brief. I just want to only very briefly refer again to the core document that was the basis for the public consultation, and there, with regard to energy, it was stated that we should further build on the position of the Alpine region as, it was very pathetic wording indeed, as world class in terms of energy efficiency. I don't know if we are really there at the moment, but we shall further build on it. And also with regard to the sustainable production of renewable energy. So there will be definitely a lot of discussion about new installation of wind power, I think, new hydropower plants or the modernization of existing ones, and then of course also about biomass. And there we also and always have to keep in mind that we have several interests that have to be balanced. Social ones, economic ones, natural ones, and so on. And I think our speakers will definitely also come to these points, and I again hope very much that we will then also hear from the audience about these ideas and questions. And I would now again pass the floor to Agnes. She will make a very short presentation about the outcome as regards to energy, and then we will have the interventions by our speakers, and then again the floor is up to you. Thanks very much.
Could I have my presentation, please? Right, so I'm going to be very brief actually, because you saw much of what I had to say in the previous presentation. Just to remind you that yes. So this is a reminder of a previous slide. This is a support to the 11 objectives, and you can see marked with the red arrows. These are the energy-related objectives which were put up for voting or for support in the public consultation, and you can see that the second and third most popular objective was related to energy. So fostering energy efficiency and saving, among others, in the housing and mobility sector was one of them, and fostering instruments and procedures to negotiate the balance between the interest of energy and nature was another very popular objective. And also in my analysis of the topics which were yes, here it is. So in my analysis of the topics which were mentioned most often as areas for support, in question one, energy was the most often mentioned single topic among the environmental topics. However, if you look at the actions that were proposed for energy, there isn't such a huge list of actions which were proposed for the energy sector. As I mentioned in my previous presentation, the actions don't include energy networks, so they're basically limited to renewable energy and energy efficiency. And also within the area of energy efficiency, mostly the building sector was mentioned. And the fact that there are these traditional building practices in the Alps, and there are already ongoing initiatives, very successful initiatives actually, which have managed to integrate energy efficiency into these traditional building practices, also including passive building. So they have managed to drastically increase the energy efficiency performance of, for example, wooden and log housing. especially in Austria and Germany. And this type of initiative could be spread across the Alpine region. So basically, these are the types of initiatives that were mentioned, and as well as finding the balance between the use of biomass and the use and renewable energy, and in particular by, for example, enhancing the use of agricultural wastes and the use of these for energy purposes. So these are the types of actions that were proposed, and despite, I think I see one slight contradiction in the fact that energy was one of the most supported topics. However, when it came to actually proposing actions, people didn't seem to be that ambitious. So maybe you can also discuss this issue and see whether there are any other energy-related areas which are Alpine-specific and which could be really supported through this strategy.
Okay, thank you, Agnes, for the intervention. What I consider very interesting, let's say two things. First of all, the energy issue is a rather matter of local and regional relevance. It's not considered of overall political relevance, but as for also for the actions, it's very much oriented locally and regionally. And there's a kind of contradiction. It raised the highest attention in the consultation on the one hand, but on the side of the actions we have just 3 bullet points. So there's a gap between, I think, a little bit, and there's room for improvement, I think, for elaborating the action plan, and just that's why we're asking for more, let's say, concrete actions to be proposed in the future action plan. That's for the introductional part, and now I pass the floor to Paolo Angelini for his intervention, please.
Grazie Presidente, ma io sono già intervenuto in qualche maniera e come Presidente del Comitato Permanente devo dire che per me è abbastanza impegnativo riassumere quello che il Comitato Permanente ha prodotto in questi 2 anni di lavoro, perché in realtà il mio compito è stato quello di coordinare, di guidare, ma il lavoro è venuto dagli esperti e dai delegati. Qui va un grande ringraziamento. Io devo dire che l'energia è per sua natura un tema estremamente interessante. In fisica energia si dice attitudine, capacità di compiere lavoro. Questa è energia e capite bene che se lo traduciamo in termini di capacità e attitudine a compiere lavoro, avere energia è un fattore strategico davvero importante. Uno studio di qualche anno fa della Baviera, di un istituto bavarese, ci ha raccontato che intorno alle Alpi, nel bacino di territorio intorno alle Alpi, c'è lo sviluppo industriale più elevato d'Europa, la più forte capacità di innovazione, una più alta densità di popolazione, un PIL più alto del resto d'Europa. E naturalmente la Baviera, Monaco, si definisce la capitale di questo territorio, ma questo è un di cui importante. Ma insomma, tutto questo storicamente è dovuto a qualcosa di importante. A cosa è dovuto? È dovuto al fatto che da sempre, da molti anni, intorno alle Alpi c'è disponibilità di energia idroelettrica. E questo è importante. Prima come acqua, come vapore, ma poi come energia. Questo ha permesso un grande sviluppo. E quindi la capacità delle Alpi di produrre energia è qualcosa che storicamente è consolidato. E oggi ci troviamo di fronte a un'altra scelta. Dalle Alpi viene la quantità di energia rinnovabile decisamente più importante. E quindi dobbiamo approcciare all'energia delle Alpi in una maniera strategica. Sempre qualche anno fa, il G8 di Genova ha ricordato che più tristi eventi fu fatta una proposta in questo momento. Fu detto bisogna smetterla di pensare all'Europa come un'Europa di stati e quindi ognuno con la sua politica energetica, ognuno con le sue riserve energetiche, capacità energetica,
sia da fonti non producendo più nuovi impianti, ma gestendo il surplus di energia che questi impianti già esistenti sono e in quella circostanza il bacino produttivo del rilievo alpino era di gran lunga importante perché era la componente rinnovabile del totale di gran lunga importante. E quindi
Switzerland, when I was walking from the hotel here to the venue, there were basically two thoughts that went to my head. Well, the first one started when I was walking, and the second when I was here. The first one was that I was thinking about the public referendum we had last weekend. I'm not sure if everybody here looked at the press notes about this, but we had an important, for me at least, coming from a research institution, a very important referendum, basically saying that we are not following the ideas of this EcoPop initiative, so we will try to work together with other countries also in the future, and I'm very happy about that. And second thing that was a little bit more positive, and I have to say before I start, it could be in any country and not only here. When I entered the main hall down in the auditorium, the first feeling was that it's really hot in there. And the second thing I did, I'm an engineer, I looked at the ceiling and it was made out of plastic, one thin sheet of plastic. And then the third thought, of course, was where is energy efficiency? So I think this shows us we have a long way to go and there's a lot to be done. And what I would like to make the point there as well, what is important at the end is the concrete actions. And the concrete actions in the Alpine region, in the villages, in the cities, in the dwellings, but also in the environment. So I hope from this initiative, from the EUSALP initiative at the end, that we really end up with concrete actions that help move us forward. And then I go more in the details. What I also would love that we try to focus. Because we were talking about a lot of things, and it was mentioned before. Not all the problems, and we are now in the energy field, not all the energy problems can be solved within the Alpine Convention, within the EUSALP initiative. So I think it's very important to try to focus what is specific to the Alps, that has been said before, and second also what can be implemented in reality. And okay, so after these more general words, I would like to go more and more into detail what I mean by that. And I have 3 points where I think the Alpine region has a specific position. And the first point that has been mentioned before, it's building dwellings, villages and cities, so this area of inhabitants. The second area is exploitation. So energy exploitation, but there might be also tourism and this topic. And the third topic is transportation. And I know there is a separate session on transportation, but here transportation, I'm also thinking about energy transportation. And why do I think these 3 points are specific to the Alpine region? With dwellings, I'm using term because it's not only housing, it's a whole system of people living in the Alpine region. Of course, we all know, and I think that has been discussed, there are specific issues. We have a special climate, we have a special history also of our villages, we have the cultural inheritance we are looking at. And this is definitely something different from if you look at the larger city or if you look at a more rural area outside of the Alpine region. And what we did, and I would like to bring that up as an example, we worked at ETH Zurich, at our research institution. We worked on a project together with the community of Zernetz in the Swiss Alps, where we looked at how could the energy strategy look for the village of Zernetz. And what we did is not come up with a general strategy, but we went there, we sent dozens of students going from house to house, checking what is the energy system in there, what is the insulation. And now we are working on an action plan for the community in order to implement concrete steps that allow them to reduce their CO2 imprint in order to improve energy efficiency and also to improve their local production. And what is interesting with this project that it really takes a holistic approach. We're not only looking at energy, we're looking at the housing stock, we're looking at renovation factors, we're looking at political aspects as well. Because there was even, it's Switzerland, so we have this thing called direct democracy. There was a public vote within the village, and so a majority of the inhabitants of the village do agree to this strategy, and they are happy to pay a little surplus on their energy prices to actually make the things happen. And I think that's a very nice example where you see that you cannot tackle energy alone. You really have to take this holistic approach. So this was an example for this first area where I think we really can make an impact, and EUSALP can make an impact. Then the second point, there it might be a little bit more difficult. I called it exploitation. And of course, under exploitation, the biggest part is hydropower, if we are looking at energy. But of course, there are other exploitations of the Alpine region. I mean, it could be tourism, it could be skiing resorts that you could consider exploitation. What is the difference to the first topic? With exploitation, actually, the Alpine region is providing a service to the community, a service to the country, a service to Europe. You were actually mentioning this in your talk. So this is a different approach. It's not so much local. It's really like you have to look at how does the Alpine region play a role within the whole energy strategy of a country, but also at the end of the European Union. And I fully agree with you. I mean, that cannot be tackled country by country. So there, it's a little bit more difficult. I think what we need to look at is how the regulation will look in the future. How can the community and the overall community pay for the service that is provided by the Alpine region? And there we are moving into areas like market design. How can a hydropower station play its role in the future of electricity markets? And we have a research project in this area as well. I don't want to go into the details, but of course the big question that was mentioned in the last panel was the cost-benefit analysis. And then of course, like, the question is who is paying and who is benefiting. So this is something I would like to have tackled there as well. And then the third point is transportation. There it becomes even more difficult. If you go to a Swiss Alpine Valley, you see basically the train, the road, and electricity and gas pipelines all in the same little, very deep valley. And the region there doesn't get any benefit from that. So how do we tackle that? How do we tackle that in the future? And I think this is an important task that should be discussed there as well. And there again, I mean, it's kind of a service that the Alpine region is providing. And I think we should also look at how these remunerations are being handled. Okay, so I don't want to be more I don't want to be longer there, but I think in all these areas, research can also play an important role. Of course, I have to say that I'm coming from a research institution, but I think it's not only the base research. I think we also have we can provide an input there, because we also try to have this holistic view, taking into account economic, technical, environmental, and also political aspects, all within one framework. And then, of course, there were some questions being put up on the slide before, and I'd like to give a few comments on that. I think in terms of topics, that's maybe an important point. It was shown that in energy we only have like 3 areas of actions, but I think that's actually a good thing. Let's focus on very little topics and do a good impact there, instead of trying to have like dozens of ideas and not succeed in any of them. And if you look at the third point, which was basically buildings, this is a huge thing. It's not something that is done very easily, but it needs to be enlarged to this more holistic point of view. It's not only about retrofitting existing houses. It's like how to look at the whole building stock together with society and economic aspects. And then the other question was like, is environment a good cross-cutting topic? There, my very simple question is no. But that's my personal opinion. And why do I say no? Because again, I think only looking at one topic doesn't give us the full picture. And we really, it's difficult. It's not easy, because it's really cross-disciplinary in its real sense. But it doesn't help if we just look at how to protect the environment. And again, here it was said before, we also need to look at the economic development. We also need to look at these services that the Alpine region does provide. And only like if we look at this as a whole, we can see where we can actually improve. And so I don't think that's a good idea. I think it's better to focus on a couple of topics that are really specific to the Alpine region and then do the holistic approach in these very limited number of topics. But that's only because I was asked, and that's my answer. And then, yeah, most successful initiatives. I mean, we heard a couple of other also from the audience initiatives where communities are working together. I really think that at the end we cannot work without the communities. They need to be involved and they need to be behind these ideas. And maybe to conclude, a very funny anecdote of this project Zanetz we had. We went there. We went to the community and had discussions with experts from their local commission dealing with energy issues, and then at the end there were some schnapps being provided, and we drank it, and then the head of this commission came to us and says, "This is all good, but be sure that my house is not included in the next step of actions for renovation." So I think it's very important to really talk to the people at the place where we try to include these actions. And so my recommendation is focus on a couple of topics, make that a holistic approach. And then on the more institutional side, that's not my topic because I'm research, but some fora discussion platforms that might be helpful, especially if the communities are included, and maybe also on a very limited regional level. I think that could really help. And at the end, again, as a little ad, I would love to see cross-Alpine research being more and stronger included in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian, for your clear words. First of all, saying that not all problems can be solved by EUSALP, and second, that it's better to have less topics than more. I know I was provoking at the beginning, that's what the reason why. And I think you could help us in creating this kind of action plan. You used the term strategy and action plan for the Zanetz area, so maybe we should hand over responsibility for preparing the action plan of the whole strategy to Switzerland and to you. No, I was joking. I'm very count on your contribution in the future on the energy sector, and I thank you very much. Well, then I hand over to Patrick Villa.
Good morning, everyone. So I think I'm the last one on the agenda, so I'll try to be crisp and clear and provide some concrete examples or maybe thoughts about where we think we could make some improvements within the context of this macro region. I just have a couple of slides. Okay, I think everybody's gone. Yes. Okay, so maybe I'll just start and tell you that I'm part of a regional energy and environment agency of Rhône-Alpes, and we have been working with public authorities mainly at the regional and local level for the last 30 years on sustainable energy and sustainable development. And one key element is also the involvement of civil society in all these planning efforts. So this will be one subject I wanted to share with you today. And also the second point I'd like to address is more related to sustainable energy planning at sub-national level. So really involving region and municipalities and how they can better address energy planning within the Alpine region. Yes. Okay, so maybe just one initial remark. I have several ones here, but I think we discussed most of the points already. I'd just like to highlight the last one, which is really a key outcome from the consultation, at least from our point of view as Regional Energy Agency, which is that sustainable energy is really a cross-cutting theme of Pillar 3. And most of the time when we discuss it locally with the regions and municipalities, we have to included in a complete debate around sustainable development, and really including all aspects of natural resources, sustainable development, water and climate change. So overall, our recommendation here is really to implement, and it's not easy, integrated and sustainable approaches and solutions when we talk about energy, at least at the regional and local level. So with that, I'd like now to move to the involvement of civil society in all these planning efforts. This is an ongoing theme, but a theme which is not easy to implement. Again, luckily in the Alpine region, we have a strong presence of, for instance, what we call non-profit organizations, such as energy agencies, and we're one of them, but there are also clusters and different types of organization. And this is really something you don't find very often in other in other regions, European regions. The second point I'd like to highlight here is that these NPOs play a very important role in creating the links between public authorities and the civil society, but also supporting and facilitating the work of the public authorities. Most of the time we work a lot with them on sustainable energy action plans and support them in this area. So we are in close contact with civil society or other regional and local stakeholders, including economic players, for instance, but also energy companies, engineering companies, etc. One key point that was mentioned earlier is really the point that we still need to work on facilitating the acceptance of renewable energy by citizens, and this is very much true in Alpine regions. And the last point I would like to mention is that these organizations, non-profit, are really key in coordinating the network of actors at local level, as you can see on the graph below. Okay. I don't want to stay on this one. Yes, several times. Okay, there we go. I went too far. So, oops, sorry, it's really... Just need to stop where I would like to. Okay, I'd just like to say a few words about the challenges for these non-profit organizations. So usually they are very small and we would say fragile structures, just few people, and despite that they still need to constantly develop their technical skills, which is not easy. For instance, addressing areas like what we mentioned this morning, conflict management related with natural resources. They need to implement also develop some skills on smart grids, but also more transversal tools such as participative tools or new economic models. So what could be done? Okay, so what could be done is really to facilitate the exchange of experience and capacity building amongst the Alpine non-profit organization. There has been already many projects around the Alpine Space Program focusing and supporting this effort, but this is probably one area and one priority we should keep working on. And the second suggestion, this is just a thought at this point that I'd like to share with you, is to create an Alpine energy knowledge sharing platform which would be really accessible to these non-profit organizations, but also civil society. Really to understand the challenges that we can find in the Alpine region and share some information, for instance, around cross-cutting subjects. The other point I'd like to mention here, and this is, I think, from our point of view important, is to have some representative of the civil society part of the governance of EUSALP. It's not easy to define who should be there and what could be done. But our fear is that civil society will not be very well represented. Maybe it's a wrong perception on our side. But we would like to insist on this point, really to keep involving citizens in this approach, macro-regional approach. Moving on to my second point, which is planning of alpine compatible sustainable energies. As we see today, we have a wide variety of technologies which have been already implemented and deployed in the alpine region. You have the list here, so we talked about highly energy efficient buildings, but most recently we have seen some very interesting initiatives around sustainable mobility in mountain areas. Also, in terms of energy planning by public authorities at regional and local level, there is a strong effort at this stage, which is underway. I think we counted like more than 700 municipalities within the Alpine region that are working on a sustainable energy action plan for their own territories, which is quite impressive. They do it within the Covenant of Mayor initiative, but they also do it through some joint project or collaborative projects, such as CEAP Alps project, which is an Alpine space project. And this leads to some very interesting, I would say, initiative and transnational approaches, such as two I listed here. One is a CESBA, which is a transnational approach that was designed between, for instance, Austria, Germany, France, and Italy, to define some common standards around sustainable building assessment. And this has been recently discussed at European level with the DG Environment to have it, to build on this initiative at the European level and try to have it standardized. The other initiative I'd like to mention is the Positive Energy Territories, which is also linked to some transnational approaches around sustainable energy. Okay, finally, okay, so there are some challenges in energy planning, and I'd like to close with this. And I think we touched on those challenges a little bit also before. And this is about collaboration between the different administrative levels. As we see today, sustainable energy planning cannot only be done, for instance, at municipality level. There is a need for better coherence between the different levels, for instance, the regional and local. If we don't do that, there is a risk of inconsistency and overlaps. We already see that on a day-to-day basis. What a municipality would like to implement is not necessarily what the regional level has in mind. So at the end of the day, it will not happen. Okay, they will not invest in sustainable energy. Definitely these days there is a need to implement economies of scale, to mobilize additional stakeholders against citizens, and we see more and more citizen investment programs supporting this local approach. And we need to better manage conflict in the use, and we talked about this, of EUSALP natural resources for energy. So all in all, and more we see the need for collaborative approaches and so-called multi-level governance for sustainable energy planning. If we don't do that, we will get many local sustainable energy action plans which are completely unrealistic and will not happen. The encouraging part is that we already have some collaborative approaches in place in Europe, for instance, around joint procurement, for instance, around joint sustainable energy action plan, and we can definitely build on those collaborative approaches. So what more could be done, and I'd like to close with this proposal, is probably to work more around this concept of multi-level governance by identifying, promoting collaborative approaches amongst public authorities, develop some guidance tool, and maybe at EUSALP level try to promote these efforts, which again are not obvious for public authorities to implement and have some kind of EUSALP multi-level governance voluntary scheme. So we believe this point is very important if we want to work on sustainable energy, sustainable development, and more generally on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, also for your strong engagement for this matter of multi-level governance. That's very much about it in this strategy, of course. And it's really impressive to see how many regional, local initiatives are already in place, and that we need something like a common roof to bring all those initiatives together. And thanks also to the link to the Alpine Space Program, as this could be one of the sources, the funding sources for doing so. Well, that's it for the moment, for the intervention, and now it's again your turn. And again, it's Ivan.
Thanks. We had some question before, so now your turn again to raise your doubts and about up to now. So is there any question from the audience related to the topic of energy? Please.
Klaus Lorenz from Germany, and we settled a few months before in an initiative named the Energy of the Alps. Some of the people sitting here in the room are knowing about this initiative, and in our talks with several official sites, officials in Alto Adige, in Austria, in Germany, we could find some challenges, and I want to describe these challenges with short words. Many people are thinking only about their own village. We heard it some moments before. It could also be a result of the word decentralized energy, because many people hopes on energy, that energy will be for their own, in their own villages, and nobody or not so many people living in the Alps or also in Munich or in Bozen really think about that the Alps are also a source of energy production for the rest of the EUSALP. They are often thinking about their own social life, their own historic development, and these points of view should be included in the development of energy of the Alps. Then we talk on a basis of 20 years experience with specialized technical associations as BWE or on German geothermal sites. They are only thinking about their own technology. They are not thinking integrated, and this is a big challenge. Then another challenge is, Patrick Biard mentioned it, that we need a knowledge-sharing platform where also normal citizens could be informed about what could be possible in the Alps. But some weeks before, we made a survey in Germany over 7 states, North Rhine-Westphalia, Bavaria, Lower Saxony, and many of the villages and many of the towns answered. 275 out of Bavaria answered. Many of them answered, we don't have any result of citizens to be a part of the development of energy. And I think this is also a big challenge. We want to have a conference, and we want to invite you to be a part of it in March in Garmisch-Partenkirchen to discuss all these thoughts, also as projects which have been realized in the past, and I think it could be a very good idea, which was mentioned this morning, that we need a master plan of the Alps, but we also need an energy master plan of the Alps where people can learn from each other. Thank you.
Thanks. Is there any direct question or issue to our speaker? So if not, I don't know if the chair would like to address some answer or use. Yes, please.
Grazie. Riprendo la parola solo per apportare un ulteriore contributo che può essere preso dalla Convenzione delle Alpi, che opera da molto tempo su questo settore. Esiste una piattaforma energia, è esistita, ma comunque si continua a operare in Convenzione delle Alpi attraverso molti momenti di confronto tra esperti. Solo la Svizzera negli ultimi 2 anni ne ha organizzati 4, alcuni altri sono stati organizzati nel territorio nazionale. Abbiamo molti momenti in cui il confronto con gli esperti e i portatori di interesse sul territorio sono diversi. Seguite di più magari il sito della Convenzione delle Alpi per trovare questi momenti, ce ne saranno, e anche per suggerirne eventuali altri. Si può sempre cercare di cooperare in questo senso. Laddove c'è un'area particolarmente attiva e sensibile si può organizzare un momento di confronto, e questo aiuta molto nel procedere e nel trovare soluzioni. Vorrei poi richiamare un attimo l'attenzione su alcune cose. Abbiamo parlato a lungo di idroelettrico, ma non è che con questo abbiamo trascurato anche il potenziale da biomassa, laddove i boschi alpini fossero in qualche modo manutenuti, fatta manutenzione in maniera attiva. C'è poi sempre il solare, ho visto notevoli progetti di monitoring del potenziale solare, no? Ci sono anche qui un progetto fatto dalla Svizzera in cui, già utilizzando lo strumento di Google e inquadrando un paese di montagna, si può vedere, si può calcolare quanta produzione da solare può venire da quel paese sfruttando i tetti. Sono strumenti che esistono. Quello che troviamo è che la comunicazione, che talvolta funziona ancora male, l'informazione, ma la comunicazione è fatta da chi dice e da chi sente, ma anche da chi provoca un dibattito. Quindi sta un po' a noi, un po' di fatica, ma la dobbiamo fare tutti insieme per scambiare questi dati. E poi permettetemi di chiudere dicendo che quando parliamo di area alpina noi dovremmo pensare soprattutto in termini di cambiamenti climatici all'adattamento, perché il contributo in termini di riduzione delle emissioni di CO2 che può venire dalle Alpi a livello globale non è grande cosa, e soprattutto questo si confronta con una richiesta di sforzo a chi vive in montagna superiore a chi vive in pianura, cioè cercare di ridurre ulteriormente le risorse, le emissioni da parte di chi vive in montagna significa andare a chiedere un enorme sacrificio in più rispetto a chi vive in pianura, e, come abbiamo sentito dall'intervento precedente, operare magari nel risanamento delle periferie di città porta a un contributo in termini di riduzione di emissioni di gran lunga superiore che grandi interventi in montagna. Viceversa, chi vive in montagna subisce gli effetti
del cambiamento climatico. Ne abbiamo visto alcune foto, case trasportate in torrenti, per carità c'è anche la questione della pianificazione, ma in genere chi vive in montagna subisce gli effetti del cambiamento climatico in maniera più consistente e più impegnativa di chi vive in pianura. Quindi io chiuderei qui dicendo, non voglio rubarti la chiusura Peter, ma è importante che noi pensiamo a dare una qualità della vita a chi vive in montagna che sia paragonabile a quella di chi vive in pianura e in città. Grazie.
Thank you very much, Paolo, for once more pointing out that, of course, the whole package of renewable energies consists of many different topics. So it's solar energy, it's hydropower, it's biomass, it's wind, of course. All of this has to be taken into account. And also, thank you for raising this issue of the energy in the Alps master plan, or how to say it. I can guarantee you that we on the Commission side will take into account all the points that have been mentioned here this morning, and that they will be part of the action plan in the end. And afterwards we will now have this session downstairs to wrap up a bit and to close it, but I think the closure of this workshop now is for you, for the chair.
Yes, but I will keep it very short because I don't want to prevent you from taking your coffee break. Thank you to all of you for your contributions. I also would like to take the occasion to thank all the speakers being here today and inspiring us with their interventions. We meet again in the plenary at 12:15 for closing remarks, also for summarizing the different sessions. So you can join also to listen to what has been elaborated in the other sessions. I was informed by the interpreters that you should take your headset with you, if I've got it right, hopefully. Yes, okay. And if you can not join in the plenary session, I wish you an environmental friendly